June 28, 1914. Sarajevo, 10:45 a.m. A 19-year-old student steps out of a crowd. Gavrilo Princip fires twice. Franz Ferdinand is dead, so is Sophie. In Vienna, telephones crackle. In Berlin, cables are marked urgent. In St. Petersburg, an aide scribbles Sarajevo and underlines it twice. One detail, two shots, and a continent that spent 40 years inventing timetables and treaties starts counting days instead of years. The foreshadow is simple. Every government believes it can move fast without falling. Cut to July 5-6. Potsdam. The German emperor receives the Austrian ambassador. The promise is blunt. Berlin will back Vienna, whatever measures it takes. Historians will call it the blank check. It looks decisive, almost theatrical. But it's not the only open-ended guarantee that month, and it's not the last one that matters. While Germany blames Russia for lighting the fuse, another assurance, less famous, less loudly proclaimed, hardens the powder. It comes wrapped in tricolor sashes and polite toasts, delivered on the deck of a French battleship, timed to reach Moscow and Paris through storm and static. By July 23rd, Austria-Hungary delivers its ultimatum to Serbia. 48 hours, 10 demands, some enforceable, some impossible. Cabinets read and reread the clauses. In Belgrade, the government flinches but does not fold. In St. Petersburg, ministers see a trap and a test. In Paris, nothing moves on paper that isn't already in motion in minds. Zoom out. Europe in 1914 is a machine with meshed gears. There is the Franco-Russian alliance with its military convention. If Germany mobilizes, France mobilizes. If one ally is attacked by a member of the Triple Alliance, the other acts. There is the German operational plan that depends on speed, rails, and a wheel through Belgium. There is Russia, vast but slow, with partial mobilization fantasies and general mobilization realities. There is France, smaller but compact, with planned swept primed to drive toward Alsace-Lorraine. Everyone insists they want peace. Everyone writes sentences that begin, if they do X, then we must do Y. Peace becomes the sum of chained contingencies. A week before Austria's ultimatum, the French President Raymond Poincaré and the Premier, René Viviani, steam into the Baltic on the battleship France. Dates, July 20th to July 23rd. Ports, Kronstadt and St. Petersburg. Purpose, ceremony, alliance management, reassurance. The timing, coincidence or design, lands the highest French voice in Russia just as the Austrian note is being finalized. What is said in those rooms is not shouted from balconies. It doesn't need to be. The message, risked across distance, restated across dinners, repeated in private audiences, adds steel to Russian calculations. France will not pull back. France will stand firm if Germany stands behind Austria. Before we get there, the setup behind the setup. Since 1894, Paris and St. Petersburg are tied. The alliance is not sentiment, it's arithmetic. Germany sits between them. The only way to balance German power is to lock French money, Russian men, and Franco-Russian coordination into one counterweight. French loans build Russian rails. Russian numbers reassure French planners. The alliance has clauses, annexes, calendars. How many corps? How many days? Which railheads? This is not a vague friendship. It is a schedule. Now the present tense again. July 21st. On the French flagship, Poincaré meets Nicholas II. The visible part is easy. Reviews of sailors, speeches about friendship, flags reflected in gray water. The invisible part is heavier, a reading of Vienna's intentions, Berlin's motives, Russia's thresholds. Poincaré's style is dry, precise, legalistic. He believes deterrence requires clarity. He believes ambiguity favors the aggressor. He believes the alliance must be performed as well as written. He does not have to say blank check to deliver one. He only has to remove doubt that France will move if Russia moves, so long as Germany stands behind the escalation. The Austrian ultimatum lands on the evening of July 23rd. In Belgrade, the clock starts. In St. Petersburg, Sergei Sazonov and his colleagues argue partial mobilization for Austria versus general mobilization for the world they fear will follow. The Russian General Staff insists the first slips quickly into the second. Their railway tables tell them so. In Paris, the French leadership is at sea, literally returning from Russia, and telegraph lines are unreliable. For nearly 48 hours, France's top decision-makers are on a moving ship, reading events through the lag of wireless. But the most important assurance has already been delivered face-to-face. The alliance is not idle, it is remembered. What did Paris actually promise? Not a signature on a blank sheet, not a written indemnity. But in the calculus of July, words delivered by a head of state to another head of state matter more than paper. The content fits the logic of the alliance. France will meet her obligations. France will not abandon Russia in a crisis born of Viennese overreach. France expects Russia to be firm, measured, and ready. It is a conditional pledge that functions like an unconditional one because the conditions, Austrian pressure on Serbia, German backing for Vienna, are virtually guaranteed. The assurance tips the balance in St. Petersburg's deliberations. It narrows the space for any Russian retreat that looks like betrayal in Paris. By July 25th, Serbia replies to Vienna. It yields on many clauses, refuses others that touch sovereignty. Vienna calls it evasive. Petersburg calls it reasonable. Berlin calls it too late. The Austrian machinery moves toward war. Russian ministers look again at the map and the clock. They see Galicia, Poland, East Prussia, and the Black Sea. They see German trains and Austrian battalions. And somewhere on their tables lies the memory of Poincaré's tone. France will not break. On July 28th, Austria declares war on Serbia. Rivers are shelled, bridges fall, and the Danube suddenly matters as more than a line on a map. The next day, Russia announces partial mobilization in the south against Austria. The word partial convinces no one who reads timetables for a living. German planners know Russia cannot mobilize one arm without the rest of the body moving. In Berlin, the Chancellor and the General Staff argue that partial mobilization is a threat to the Schlieffen-Moltke logic. In Paris, now back on land, the government interprets Russian caution as diplomacy with muscles attached. What happens next makes the pattern obvious. On July 30th, Nicholas II authorizes general mobilization. He wavers, he tries to rescind, he signs again. In Berlin, telegrams are stacked and tied. German leaders decide that a Russian general mobilization is the last possible warning. They issue their own ultimata, to Russia, to France. To France, the demand neutrality in the event of a Russo-German war, with assurances not to threaten Germany and to hand over frontier fortresses. It is a demand Paris cannot accept without breaking itself. It is made to be refused. The numbers tell a different story than the speeches. Mobilization tables are not poetry, they are fine print schedules. Germany's deployment across the Rhine and through Belgium requires tens of thousands of rail movements. Each day of delay multiplies risk. Russia's full mobilization takes weeks, Germany's days. France sits between speed and depth, forced into a choice it didn't set and can't ignore. Under those conditions, every pre-crisis assurance, German to Austrian, French to Russian, tightens the timetable. Words spoken in drawing rooms become trains ordered in marshalling yards. By August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. By August 3rd, Germany declares war on France. By August 4, Britain declares war on Germany after the invasion of Belgium. The cascade is famous, the dates etched into monuments and school books. What is less famous is how July's assurances made August's certainty possible. Germany points at Russia. They mobilized first. Russia points at Austria. They issued the ultimatum. Austria points at Serbia. They tolerated murder. France points at the alliance. We did what duty demanded. Each is true, and each is incomplete. Missing from the surface is the reinforcing echo from Paris to St. Petersburg. Not an order, not a command, an expectation, a pledge, a moral credit line that could be drawn without asking again. Cut inside the French war room in the Élysée on August 2nd. Poincaré meets generals and ministers. Plan 12 is opened. Covering forces take their positions. Frontier garrisons brace. French railways pivot from passengers to troops. Civilian schedules vanish. Military timetables rule. The state flips into wartime logic with grim efficiency. Behind every order is a chain of earlier commitments. To an ally, to a plan, to the idea that firmness now prevents disaster later. That idea was rehearsed in the Baltic before the shooting started. Back to the Baltic, July 23rd, late evening. On deck, Poincaré watches the coastline fade. The Austrian ultimatum has reached Russian hands while he is still aboard. The Russian ministers who will decide whether to freeze or fire the machinery have looked him in the eye. He is a lawyer, a provincial turned president, polite to the point of stiffness. He does not bang tables. He does not threaten. He reminds and reassures. The alliance is solid. France will not bolt. The room hears what it needs to hear. Open loop. Germany's story in August, the public story, is clean. Russia mobilized first, Germany was forced to act. Close the loop. That claim omits the incentives created by Allied assurances. Russia did not mobilize into a vacuum. It mobilized into a known promise from France that German pressure would not split the alliance. If Germany's blank check told Vienna to push hard against Serbia, France's assurances told St. Petersburg not to fear the pressure. Each promise made the other more dangerous. Together, they crowded out compromise. Consider how this played out in Russian deliberations. On July 24th and 25th, Sazonov and the Council of Ministers tacked between caution and resolve. The argument was not about Serbia alone, it was about the chain of consequences. Partial mobilization was conceived as a signal, general mobilization as a shield. Without French firmness, partial mobilization might have lingered. With French firmness, partial mobilization looked like self-deterrence. If Germany was holding Vienna's rope, France was holding Russia's nerve. In Paris, the assurance was not reckless bravado. It came from a consistent strategy since 1912. Prevent isolation, maintain deterrence, avoid being the ally who blinks. French leaders remembered the Moroccan crises, Berlin's gunboat diplomacy, and the necessity of standing firm with London and St. Petersburg. They believed Germany exploited hesitation. They believed showing resolve reduced risk. The irony is that both sides believed the same thing. Berlin believed Vienna must push to break Serbian defiance quickly. Paris believed St. Petersburg must show that Vienna's ultimatum could not set a precedent for vassalizing small states under German protection. Two convictions, both phrased as peacekeeping, collided. Quantify the pressures. An Austrian army planning against Serbia counted corps and bridges and imagined a short, punitive campaign. A German general staff counted days to beat a Russian slow giant and a French quick neighbor. A French staff counted covering days to receive British help and absorb the first blow. A Russian staff counted weeks and rail bottlenecks and the price of being late. Numbers don't hate, they simply don't forgive. In that arithmetic, the least ambiguous political messages were the most destabilizing. Clear promises shaved hours off decisions. Hours mattered. Now the mystery reveal that reframes August's slogans. Germany blamed Russia. The Chancellor thundered about mobilization, about the sword forced into German hands, about necessity. But in private and in drafts, Berlin worried about something else, Allied cohesion. The nightmare was a split adversary becoming a united one. The old German wager, scare France off with speed and aggression while Russia is still assembling, depended on Paris blinking or hesitating. The Poincaré assurances robbed that wager of its margin. The Russian leadership could mobilize knowing France's will was set. The German leadership could attack knowing that France would not isolate itself. The result was not forced by a single telegram. It was structured by interlocking pledges, formal and informal. Return to the Austrian angle. Vienna's ultimatum had more than 10 points. It had a purpose: to exploit the post-Sarajevo outrage and impose submission before outside powers intervened. Vienna counted on German backing to prevent interference long enough to strike. Moscow counted on French backing to intervene before Serbia's sovereignty became a precedent for anyone's vassalage. Notice the symmetry. Assurances upstream made behavior downstream more rigid. The river narrowed, the current accelerated. In that narrowing, British mediation attempts found little purchase. Sir Edward Grey suggested conferences and pauses. Berlin signaled interest in form, but substance required Vienna to slow and Russia to hold. Vienna did not slow. Russia did not hold. Why? Because the movers had guarantees behind them. Germany's guarantee to Austria said, "Don't fear Russia." France's assurance to Russia said, "Don't fear Germany." Paradoxically, reassurance against fear created behavior others interpreted as aggression. A micro scene to ground this. July 25th evening, St. Petersburg. Salon windows are open. The heat is heavy. A junior official carries a draft of mobilization orders from one room to the next. He glances at a margin note. France fully informed, firm. He is not a policymaker. He carries paper. But the paper he carries embeds a decision already embedded by words spoken days earlier on a ship. He moves through a hallway of portraits. The faces on the walls are old. The ink he carries is very fresh. Shift to Paris again, August 1-2. Railway stations fill with men in blue coats and red trousers. Notices appear on doors. Mobilization closed until further notice. Bakeries knead dough through the night to feed columns. Hospitals convert wards for the wounded not yet arrived. The general staff calibrates movements down to the half hour. None of this is improvisation. It is the execution of scripts written in the years before and emotionally confirmed in July's intimate rooms. The doctrine, stand firm, do not be the ally who hesitates, now becomes a physical line of men. Did France want war? No. Did France remove Moscow's fear that firmness would leave it alone? Yes. Did that matter? It mattered where timetables were fate. The French assurance functioned as a blank check, not because Paris promised everything to Russia in any case, but because in the cases that mattered, Austrian escalation backed by Germany, it promised enough, early enough, and clearly enough to harden decisions. This shifts the center of gravity of blame without exonerating anyone. Germany and Austria-Hungary set the immediate crisis by choosing an ultimatum designed to fail and by underwriting it with continental risk. Russia escalated the crisis by translating partial mobilization into general mobilization, knowing what that meant to Berlin. France escalated the crisis by eliminating doubt in St. Petersburg about Allied support and by aligning its military clock with Russia's political clock. Britain hesitated, then entered when Belgium was invaded, the last lever pulled by a plan that had run out of alternatives. Each actor operated under incentives made more rigid by assurances. Consider the alternative history implicit in July's conversations. If France had layered its reassurance with harder conditions, if it had said explicitly that Russian general mobilization before a European conference would jeopardize immediate French steps, could that have stretched the window for mediation by 48 hours? If Germany had fenced its blank check to Vienna with explicit limits, if it had said no ultimata without a draft reviewed by us and an international timetable, could that have slowed the July 23rd note or softened its teeth? The answers are unknowable in outcomes, clear in direction. Conditions widen options. Unconditionality narrows them. In July 1914, unconditionality won. Numbers again to settle the scale. The first month of war would take hundreds of thousands of lives. French casualties in August alone climbed above 200,000 killed, wounded, and missing. German losses were comparable. Russian armies surged into East Prussia and Galicia, taking and losing tens of thousands within weeks. By winter, the Western Front had stabilized into trenches stretching roughly 700 kilometers from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier. Each trench, each crater, each hospital ward traces back to schedules started when leaders tried to be clear. Clarity without conditionality turned speed into destiny. A primary voice, carefully used. Nicholas II's diary entry on July 30th notes the heavy step, orders for general mobilization, hesitation, then renewed resolve after council. He is a man caught between loyalty to allies and fear of a catastrophe he only dimly understands. Poincaré's notes record a president convinced of the alliance's deterrent value and the necessity of firmness. Bethmann Hollweg's laments later portray a chancellor crushed by the realization that the war he justified as forced necessity was, in substantial part, the product of choices to back partners hard when ambiguity might have saved hours. The voices do not agree on blame, they agree on weight. Let's invert an early image for the climax. In August, German crowds shout, "Down with Russia," convinced their country acted second. In July, on a quiet ship, a French president assures a czar that France will not abandon him if Germany stands behind Austria. These two moments are not cause and effect in a simple line, but they are connected. Germany blamed Russia. Germany acted second. Germany counted on French hesitation and found none. The thesis lands in one sentence. Multiple blank checks, German to Austria, French to Russia, made compromise vanish faster than ultimatums could be revised. Consequences across time reinforce the lesson. The Franco-Russian alignment, hardened in July, shaped every early movement. French offensives into Alsace and Lorraine under Plan Sueth, Russian drives toward East Prussia and Lemberg, German execution of a plan that demanded violation of Belgian neutrality. Britain's choice to enter on August 4th was triggered by that violation. But the path to Belgian rails ran through a German calculus conditioned by Russian mobilization and French resolve. The machine had no spare parts by then. Quotations that reveal changed beliefs matter most when they come from the aftermath. Soldiers on all sides wrote home about the shock of modern firepower, the speed of railborne armies meeting the speed of machine guns. A French lieutenant, years later, would say he felt trapped by a timetable he could not see but could feel under his boots. A German staff officer would recall that by mid-July, the only safety seemed to lie in being first, faster, more resolute, an illusion shattered by reality. A Russian official would admit that the alliance gave courage and removed hesitation, two virtues that in July served catastrophe. Final comparative figures settle the case. Two open-ended assurances in July interacted to reduce the mediation window from weeks to days. Two mobilization schedules, designed in peacetime, compressed political bargaining into hours. Two neighbors, Austria and Serbia, triggered a conflict that within 31 days pulled in 6 great powers. It is not that one cause outweighs all others. It is that one pattern, promises without conditions, turns every other cause into acceleration. Return to the opening image with contrast. Sarajevo's shots were human, close, messy. The decisions that followed were cold, precise, and timed. A German pledge to Austria invited an ultimatum designed to fail. A French assurance to Russia removed doubt about bearing the risk. In between, cabinets hoped to move fast without falling. They fell together, not through one nation's malice, but through many nations' certainty. Not through hatred alone, but through reassurance that left no retreat. Not through a single blank check, but through a pair, echoing across alliances that made every other sentence a deadline. The universal takeaway is blunt. In systems wired to act fast, unconditional promises are accelerants. They keep faith and they burn options. The next time a leader thinks conviction alone will deter, remember July 1914. Deterrence without conditions moves trains. Conditions keep platforms crowded and guns silent. The silence we did not get in August came from words spoken in July. And then the button. Germany blamed Russia. France steadied Russia. Austria pushed Serbia. The rest is rails and orders. The cost, measured in millions, proves a hard rule. When everyone is sure, no one slows down.